west of the Nile. Where the desert meets the ruins of ancient Thebes, there is a place that almost disappeared from history. For centuries, it looked like nothing more than a lonely mound of sand. Local people called it Kom el Samak, the mound of fish. No palace, no temples, no trace of the empire that once stood there. Just silence. Then archaeologists began to dig. What they uncovered changed everything. Beneath the sand lay the remains of one of the most extraordinary royal palaces ever built in ancient Egypt. A palace with its own harbour, its own artificial lake, its own royal city. Built for a king who ruled at the height of Egypt's golden age, Amenhotep III. But the buildings were only the beginning. Inside one ruined chamber, archaeologists uncovered a painted floor unlike anything they had expected. Ducks rising through golden reeds, fish gliding beneath clear water, flowers blooming beneath the feet of a king. More than 3,000 years had passed, yet the colours still seemed alive. Then they noticed something unsettling. Some of the birds weren't simply flying. They seemed caught in their final moment, balanced between life and death. No inscription explains why. The artist left no name. Only the image remained, waiting. Then came another mystery. Hundreds of statues, not of kings, not of queens, but of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess the Egyptians believed could send plague across the land. Or spare it. Why would the most powerful ruler in the ancient world surround himself with hundreds of images of a goddess associated with disease? What frightened a man who seemed to have everything? This is the story of Malkata, the palace that rose from the desert, ruled an empire, then vanished so completely that the world forgot it had ever existed, until the sand gave it back. By the time Malkata was built, Egypt had become one of the wealthiest kingdoms the ancient world had ever known. Its borders stretched farther than they had in generations. Gold flowed north from Nubia. Ships carried luxury goods from distant lands. Foreign rulers competed for Egypt's friendship, sending gifts and tribute to a pharaoh they addressed as an equal, and sometimes as if he were more than human. His name was Amenhotep III. Unlike many kings before him, Amenhotep inherited an empire at peace. He did not need to win his greatness on the battlefield. Instead, he chose to build it. On the west bank of the Nile, across from the great temples of Thebes, thousands of laborers transformed open desert into a royal city unlike anything Egypt had seen before. This was Malkata, not simply a palace, an entire world built around a king. The complex stretched across nearly 30 hectares. Separate palaces housed the royal family. Administrative buildings kept the empire running. Storerooms overflowed with grain, wine, oils, and imported goods. Workshops, kitchens, gardens, audience halls, and ceremonial courts spread across the landscape. For a time, one of the greatest empires on earth revolved around this single place. Yet what impressed visitors most was not its size, it was the illusion. Its mud brick walls were painted to resemble fine stone. Columns blossomed with colourful flowers. Ceilings became deep blue skies filled with golden stars. Every detail reminded visitors that they had entered a place unlike the ordinary world. Even the floors told a story. Artists painted fish beneath clear water. Papyrus reeds swayed in painted marshes. Birds rose from the riverbank. Walking through the palace felt less like crossing a building, and more like wandering through the living Nile itself. But Amenhotep wanted something no palace had ever possessed: water, where there should have been none. Outside the palace, workers carved an enormous basin into the desert. Then they connected it to the Nile by canal. Soon, royal barges floated across an artificial lake so vast it astonished everyone who saw it. Imagine approaching the palace by boat, leaving the mighty Nile behind, only to sail across another lake that should never have existed. Then history presents us with an extraordinary claim. One of Amenhotep's own commemorative scarabs declares that the entire lake was completed in just 15 days, for a project stretching more than a mile in length. Even today, historians continue to debate that inscription. Was it royal propaganda? An exaggeration meant to glorify the king? Or did Amenhotep command such an enormous workforce that the impossible became reality? No one knows. The scarab survives. The workers do not. Their names were never recorded. Their stories were never carved into stone. Yet every wall, every courtyard, and every ripple that once crossed the royal lake existed because of hands history chose to forget. When the work was finally complete, the king launched his royal barge onto the new lake. Its name was Aten. At the time, it honored the visible disk of the sun. No one standing on those shores could have imagined that, within a generation, that single name would reshape Egypt, divide a royal family, and begin the slow disappearance of everything Malkata had been built to celebrate. From the outside, Malkata was built to impress. But its greatest wonders were hidden behind walls few people would ever enter. This was not one palace, it was a city of palaces. The king had his own residence. Queen Tiye had another. There were separate quarters for royal children, visiting nobles, foreign princesses, servants, guards, and the thousands of people whose lives revolved around the royal court. Long corridors connected audience halls, private apartments, kitchens, workshops, and vast storerooms filled with food, wine, perfumes, furniture, and precious gifts from across the known world. Everything a king could desire already waited inside these walls. For years, the palace echoed with voices. Musicians performed during lavish festivals. Officials hurried through its courtyards carrying royal orders. Messengers arrived from distant kingdoms. Boats crossed the lake outside. Every day, Malkata reminded the world that Egypt stood at the height of its power. Then, almost all of it disappeared. Mud brick does not survive the way stone does. When a palace is abandoned, rain weakens its walls. Floodwaters wash away its foundations. The desert finishes what time begins. Century after century, Malkata slowly collapsed into the earth beneath it. By the 19th century, almost nothing remained above the surface. Only low mounds of broken mud brick. To most people, they looked completely ordinary. No one could have guessed what lay underneath. Then the excavations began. With every layer of sand that disappeared, another piece of the lost palace returned to the light. Fragments of painted walls, broken columns, decorated ceilings, pieces of furniture, ceremonial objects. Each discovery revealed a little more of a world that had been hidden for more than 3,000 years. Then archaeologists uncovered one room unlike any other. Today, it is known as the Painted Pavement Building. Its floor was covered with scenes from the marshlands of the Nile. Blue water, golden reeds, wildflowers, fish swimming beneath the surface, birds lifting into the air. The paintings were so vivid that visitors may have felt they were walking through nature itself, not across a palace floor. But the closer researchers looked, the more unusual the artwork became. Some birds seemed to twist as they took flight. Others appeared frozen in the instant before falling. Their wings stretched wide, their bodies tilted. The artist had captured movement with astonishing realism. More than 34 centuries later, that single moment still feels alive.
Why paint scenes like these beneath the feet of a king? No ancient inscription gives an answer. Some Egyptologists believe the marsh represented the richness of the Nile, a symbol of life, prosperity, and the natural order that sustained Egypt. Others see something deeper. In Egyptian belief, the king's duty was to preserve Ma'at, the balance between order and chaos. Scenes of nature under control may have reminded every visitor that the stability of Egypt depended on its ruler. The paintings may have been beautiful, but they also carried a message. Every person who entered that room walked across a carefully crafted vision of a world kept in perfect balance. It was exactly the image Amenhotep III wanted his visitors to see: strong, prosperous, eternal. History tells a different story. Because while artists painted perfect order beneath the king's feet, beyond those walls, something may already have been changing. Something no painting, no palace, and no pharaoh could keep outside forever. The first clues did not come from monuments. They came from fear. And that fear may explain why Amenhotep III surrounded himself with hundreds of statues of one of Egypt's most terrifying goddesses, Sekhmet.
For nearly 4 decades, Amenhotep III ruled an empire unlike any Egypt had known before. Its borders were secure, its treasuries were full, its temples grew larger with every passing year. To his people, the pharaoh seemed almost untouchable, a living image of divine power. But history has a way of revealing what monuments try to hide, and sometimes a king's greatest fears are not written in words, they are carved in stone. Late in his reign, Amenhotep III commissioned something extraordinary, not dozens of statues, hundreds, all in the image of the same goddess, Sekhmet, with the body of a woman and the head of a lioness. To the ancient Egyptians, she was both protector and destroyer. She could heal, but she could also unleash disease across the land. Whether people lived or died was believed to depend on her favor. Today, more than 700 statues of Sekhmet are known from Amenhotep III's building projects. Most stood inside or around his vast mortuary temple, only a short distance from Malkata. Imagine entering that sacred complex. Everywhere you looked, stone lions stared back, silent, unmoving, as if guarding something no human eye could see. Why did one king need so many? For generations, Egyptologists have searched for an answer. One explanation is religious. Each statue may have played a role in daily rituals meant to calm the goddess and secure her protection over Egypt. But another possibility has drawn increasing attention. What if those prayers were not only for the kingdom, but for the king himself? The evidence is indirect, but difficult to ignore. Letters exchanged between rulers of the ancient Near East speak of serious illness spreading through parts of the region during the later years of Amenhotep's reign. The letters never mention Malkata by name. They never say the pharaoh was infected. But they reveal a world where disease was becoming a growing concern. Then there is Amenhotep himself. Modern examinations of the mummy believed to be his show a man who was suffering. He lived with severe dental disease, painful abscesses, advanced arthritis. Even the simple act of walking may have become difficult during his final years. The golden statues showed a perfect ruler. His body told another story. Imagine the contrast. Outside, crowds watched a king dressed in gold, appearing strong enough to rule forever. Inside, every step may have brought pain. Every ceremony demanded a smile. Every public appearance reinforced the illusion that nothing could weaken the son of the sun. Kings rarely admitted fear. Egyptian inscriptions celebrated victory, strength, order. They almost never recorded doubt. But perhaps fear leaves other kinds of evidence. Sometimes it survives in architecture, sometimes in ritual, and sometimes
in 700 silent statues, standing watch over a ruler who knew that even he could not command his own body. Whether those statues were built to protect an empire, to comfort an aging king, or both, no one can say with certainty. But one fact remains: the statues endured. The man who commissioned them did not. While Amenhotep fought to preserve his health, life inside Malkata continued as though nothing had changed. Foreign ambassadors still arrived with gifts. Royal banquets still filled the palace. Princesses from distant kingdoms still crossed its gates. Yet among everyone who entered Malkata, one woman would become more influential than kings expected. Her name was Queen Tiye. To the outside world, Malkata was a palace of unimaginable wealth. But it was also the center of international diplomacy. In the Bronze Age, peace was often negotiated long before armies marched, and sometimes it arrived in the form of a royal bride. Kings from neighboring kingdoms sought Egypt's friendship. They sent gifts of gold, horses, precious stones, and finely crafted weapons. Some sent something even more valuable: their daughters. For these rulers, a marriage to the Egyptian pharaoh was more than a family alliance. It was a promise of protection, a place beside the most powerful throne in the known world. We know this because their letters still survive. More than 3,000 years later, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of clay tablets at the abandoned city of Amarna. Known today as the Amarna Letters, they preserve conversations between the great kings of the ancient Near East. Several speak of Amenhotep III. They mention foreign princesses sent to Egypt, escorts numbering in the hundreds, negotiations over gifts, and endless discussions about gold. One Babylonian king complained that the pharaoh had not sent enough gold in return for his daughter. Another protested that his messengers had been kept waiting for too long at the Egyptian court. Even after thousands of years, the frustrations of diplomacy remain surprisingly familiar. But the letters also reveal a quieter tragedy. We know the names of many of these women before they arrived in Egypt. Then, almost nothing. Once they passed through the gates of Malkata, history became silent. No personal letters survive, no memories, no records describing the lives they lived inside the palace. They helped shape alliances between kingdoms, yet their own stories were almost entirely lost. For most of them, history remembers the journey, not the life that followed. There was, however, one woman whose voice refused to disappear: Queen Tiye. Unlike many royal wives, Tiye was not born into a foreign royal family. She was not the daughter of a king. Yet Amenhotep III elevated her to the highest position a queen could hold. And over time, she became one of the most influential women in Egyptian history. Her image appeared beside the pharaoh on monuments across Egypt. Her name was carved where earlier queens might never have been mentioned. Foreign rulers wrote letters directly to her, not simply out of respect, but because they believed she had the power to influence Egypt itself. Think about that. Powerful kings, ruling lands hundreds of miles away, believed the fastest path to the pharaoh's ear was through Queen Tiye. That alone tells us how extraordinary she had become. Even after Amenhotep III died, the letters continued. Foreign rulers still appealed to Tiye. They asked her to remember old friendships, to honor old promises, to help preserve relationships that had survived for decades. The king was gone, but the queen remained. Malkata had been built to celebrate the glory of one man, yet the person whose influence endured the longest was the woman standing beside him. But even Queen Tiye, wise, respected and powerful, could not prevent what came next. Within a single generation, her own son would reject the old gods, walk away from Thebes, and abandon the magnificent palace his father had built. The silence of Malkata was about to begin. The end of Malkata did not come with fire. No enemy army broke through its gates. No great battle was fought in its courtyards. The palace simply began to empty. After the death of Amenhotep III, the throne passed to his son. History remembers him as Akhenaten. His reign would become one of the most extraordinary and controversial,
in all of ancient Egypt. For nearly 2,000 years, Egypt had worshipped many gods: Amun, Osiris, Ptah, Sekhmet, and countless others whose temples lined the Nile. Akhenaten chose a different path. He elevated one deity above all the rest, the Aten, the visible disk of the sun. It was more than a religious reform, it was a revolution. Temples dedicated to the old gods lost their importance. Power shifted away from the priests who had shaped Egyptian religion for generations. Then Akhenaten made an even more astonishing decision. He left Thebes altogether. Far to the north, he ordered the construction of a brand new capital, a city built from the ground up for his new vision of Egypt. Today, we know it as Amarna. The royal court followed him. Officials packed their records, artisans left their workshops, servants abandoned their quarters. The ceremonies that had once filled Malkata with music and celebration came to an end. One by one, the palace's rooms fell silent. No one ordered Malkata to be destroyed. It simply no longer had a purpose. And abandoned places rarely survive for long. Mud brick walls cracked beneath the summer heat. Seasonal floods weakened their foundations. Wind carried sand into empty halls. Each passing year erased a little more of what people had once believed would last forever. Generations came and went. The artificial lake dried. Its canal disappeared. The painted walls collapsed. Roofs gave way. The voices of kings, queens, servants, musicians, and foreign guests faded into silence, until finally, the palace itself vanished beneath the desert. Centuries later, people still lived near the ruins, but they no longer knew what had once stood there. To them, it was simply Kom el Samak, the mound of fish. Why that name survived, no one knows for certain, and like many ancient ruins, the place slowly gathered stories of its own. Local traditions, recorded by some 19th and early 20th century travelers, spoke of strange lights moving across the old lakebed after dark. Others claimed that music could sometimes be heard where no musicians remained. There is no archaeological evidence that these stories are true. No excavation has uncovered anything to support them. Historians regard them as folklore, not history. Yet folklore often tells us something important, not about the past itself, but about the people who inherited it. When memory disappears, imagination fills the silence. Perhaps that is why so many legends gathered around Malkata, a place once filled with water, music, ceremony, and royal splendor, had become nothing more than a quiet hill of sand. The contrast was impossible to ignore. But the greatest mystery was never the legends. It was the palace itself. How could one of the grandest royal residences in Egyptian history disappear so completely that even its name was forgotten? The answer was waiting beneath the sand, for archaeologists to uncover, one fragment at a time. For more than 3,000 years, Malkata lay hidden beneath the desert. The royal harbour filled with sand. The artificial lake disappeared. Walls collapsed into dust. Painted plaster broke into thousands of fragments. One of the greatest royal residences in ancient Egypt slowly became almost invisible. Not through war, not through conquest, but through time. When archaeologists finally began excavating the site in the late 19th century, and more systematically throughout the 20th, they were not uncovering a standing palace. They were uncovering its memory. Foundation walls traced the outlines of forgotten rooms. Fragments of painted ceilings hinted at colors no one had seen for millennia. Broken pottery marked kitchens where royal feasts had once been prepared. Every discovery answered one question and raised another. The artificial lake was identified, the harbour was mapped. Storerooms, workshops, audience halls, and private apartments slowly emerged from beneath the sand. The painted pavement astonished scholars with its remarkable detail. The surviving inscriptions confirmed that this quiet stretch of desert had once been the ceremonial heart of an empire. Piece by piece, Malkata returned. Not as it had been, but as archaeology could rebuild it. Many mysteries, however, remain. Did thousands of laborers truly excavate the Great Lake in only 15 days? Or was the royal inscription meant to glorify the king? Why were so many images of Sekhmet commissioned during Amenhotep III's final years? Were they expressions of devotion or signs of growing fear? What conversations took place inside the palace after the foreign princesses disappeared from the historical record? And what did Queen Tiye witness as her son's revolution transformed the kingdom her husband had spent a lifetime building? For these questions, the ruins remained silent. That silence may be Malkata's greatest legacy. Ancient monuments often tell us what kings wanted the world to believe. Malkata tells us something different. It reminds us how much history can lose and how much archaeology can still recover. Every painted fragment, every broken wall, every weathered inscription brings us a little closer to people whose voices vanished thousands of years ago. Amenhotep III built this palace as a symbol of permanence, a place where foreign rulers would marvel at Egypt's wealth, where festivals would celebrate royal power, where generations would remember his name. Instead, the palace disappeared. Its lake dried, its walls fell, its name was forgotten, until the desert finally gave it back. History is often written by kings, but sometimes it is rewritten by archaeologists. And beneath the sands of western Thebes, they uncovered more than the ruins of a palace. They uncovered a reminder that even the greatest civilizations leave behind fragile traces, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Today, visitors who walk across Malkata do not see the palace Amenhotep III knew. They see broken foundations, scattered fragments, and open desert stretching toward the horizon. It takes imagination to picture the royal barges crossing the lake, the music echoing through painted halls, or ambassadors from distant kingdoms waiting to meet the most powerful ruler of their age. Yet that is exactly why places like Malkata matter. Not because they survived unchanged, but because they remind us how easily greatness can disappear. Empires fade, palaces crumble, names are forgotten. But the human desire to understand the past endures. Perhaps that is why archaeologists continue to return, not searching for treasure, but searching for stories. Stories hidden beneath layers of sand, waiting patiently for the next discovery. Thank you for walking through the lost palace of Malkata with us. If you enjoy documentaries where history, archaeology, and forgotten places come together, subscribe to Tragic Mansions. And join us next time as we uncover another remarkable place the world almost forgot.